Hello everyone, just a note that this is part 2 of a 3-part season review. If you haven't seen part 1, I'll put a link to it in the description. We may reference some things that you haven't seen or heard yet, but we do talk about 5 of the 10 teams, notably a long time on Red Bull and Alpha Tauri. But if you want to know our main season review as a general season as a whole, we do talk about sprints as well and cover a couple of questions. I do recommend go back and watching or listening to part 1, but otherwise enjoy part 2. Part 3 will be on the way very, very soon. It will be the longest part by a long way, nearing 2 hours. So but yeah, enjoy and let us know what you think in the comments. Thanks for listening and or watching. On to the teams now. Now this is we wanted to do a big chunk of this as a team by team, because it feels like that's where a lot of the stories are. Like, you could talk about individual events, but it feels like more than ever this has been like teams sort of moving up and down, as we sort of alluded to. So I feel like sort of breaking it down team by team is the best way to do it. I literally, outside of the first team we're going to talk about, I put all the numbers in like numbers 2 through 10 in a randomizer and just hit randomize, and then on their I think their championship position, I just put it in that order. So it might be a little bit of a random mix, but rather than going in championship order or from bottom to top or whatever. So, but we'll start with the big one. Let's start with the Red Bulls. So I'm going to start with some stats and some notes that I've got on a lot of these teams first.
Take it away.
But yeah, we have Red Bull obviously finished first in the championship with a humongous 860 points. Verstappen scoring 575 of them, Perez with 285. Qualifying head-to-head was 22 Verstappen and 2 to Perez. That's a pretty big one. Not the biggest, but one of. And let's go through some of the records, shall we? I think we gotta start there. So we've got Verstappen in 2023, 19 wins, which is a single season record, 21 podiums, single season record, 575 points, single season record, 10 consecutive wins, single season record. The largest championship winning margin to second place at 290 points, 1,003 laps led, which is a single season record, and he's also the only driver to have led 1,000 laps in a season. And outside of Singapore, in which he finished 5th, and Baku Sprint, where he finished 3rd, he was either first or second in every single race of the season. Looking at Red Bull, 21 wins, which is a single season record, and again, most laps led in a single season at 1,149 laps. So let's talk about Perez.
Okay.
Yeah, how do you compete with that?
I think he was lucky that it didn't matter that he was completely off his game. I think he is very lucky, because I think Red Bull were pretty honest putting their hands up saying we don't need to change anything, so why should we? However, as we saw in past years, where if it does kind of matter they have a backup driver, they probably won't hesitate to pull someone in, because they have got a few options now. It's not like they're doing it because they've got nothing else there.
Yep.
We saw as soon as Ricciardo came back, that was as much a statement of partly that we need to get De Vries out and we still think Ricciardo's good. It was that statement, as well as let's put some pressure on Checo, because it's obvious why we're also doing this.
Yeah. And they also, that was one thing, but it was still kind of we'll talk about this when we get to Alpha Tauri as well.
Yes.
But I think even worse for Perez was Ricciardo going out for those 4 races, because Lawson came in and also did very well. So now they have, rather than, if they wanted to drop Perez because he's not performing, it's like, oh, now we've got to fill an Alpha Tauri seat. We don't know if someone's going to perform.
Or put him in there, or he's not going to want to go in there.
Exactly. He's not going to want to drop back. But even if he
risk
did want
on
to
an F2 driver.
Yeah, exactly. Now they know they've got a driver who can confidently go up to Red Bull, who's been there before, who has a good relationship with the lead driver in Max, and they have a very competent driver who can jump straight into the Alpha Tauri and be very quick from the offset as well. I think that is, outside of losing his seat for next year, this is probably worst case scenario for Perez. Like I think it is so important for him to perform this year. And if he doesn't, I think there's a good chance we don't see him in F1 after 2024. No. So, but yeah, I mean, it's an overarching problem that I know a lot of people have done, like articles and talked about a lot, is how do you be Max Verstappen's teammate? Because when he's on this sort of form, you can't really expect to beat him, but you still have to think you can, because otherwise it's just like you end up like Bottas, and I think
how do you do it as well in a team that's not also like Ferrari, which is structured to almost be that team, right?
Yes,
like where you had the Rubens, you had the Massa and the such, which took that during the time when you had the Alonso or the Schumacher that was there, So, or even being the Eddie Irvine back in the day, it was still that kind of guy, right? So,
the Rubens,
it's a different
Barrichello,
structure there. Yes, it was part of the reason why that initially Red Bull had that issue, was between Max and Ricciardo trying to fight with each other at a very similar level. Ricciardo stepped out to say, I'm not happy to be a number 2 here because I can see that's where I'm going. I want to try something else. Obviously, now he tried something else, and he said in interviews and podcasts and such, if he did come back in, he's well aware he would need to be that number 2 performer. But he's later on in his career, he'd probably be happy to do that. They've repaired their relationship, etc. Right? But yeah, even if you get someone who is at that level, that's why they went with Checo, because I think they saw he's out of a job, he's competent, he could do something special here, so let's try it. And to be fair, again, in that 2021 season when they really needed it, was it 21 or 22 when he needed it?
21, yeah.
The years are blurring. 21, when he needed to be that guy, he was that guy. Yep. And now it's almost like that pressure's not there. He's completely dropped away. So it's that question we have of many drivers, is saying, if now it actually matters in the new year, will he then reinvigorate and find that level? Is that just what's missing? Is it just because it doesn't matter? Is it, it's also annoying because we saw such a strong start from him, where he had two wins in the scale of the season. If you look at that to go, wow, he must have done pretty good to still win against Verstappen, being how dominant he was. And then you go, oh, they were right at the start. And then it was a great point that I heard on I think it must have been the Race podcast, or maybe it was Checkered Flag again. No, it was an excerpt from Sky I saw on Twitter, actually. It's
getting your news from everywhere.
It had Karun on. He was telling a story that Jos told him. Basically,
I remember seeing
Miami
this
after Baku. Yes.
Yep.
And Jos was saying how Max was furious that he lost at Baku, and he said he's never going to lose to Checo ever again.
And he didn't.
And the next race was Miami. And Checo should have won Miami. There was no reason he shouldn't have won that. And yet Max just stepped up to an insane level, And that's almost what crushed Checo, where it's like, if he won that, I think he still for the rest of the season he would have been fine. But he didn't, and it was totally on him. And even looking at that one race, even we said Max was just so high, I don't think anyone could have beaten him. Even if Checo was in the lead, he still did great. He still did fine at P2. But that just said it. And then it just seemed that he was, just gone from then.
Yep. Well, I went back and looked at the races actually following that. So I want to bring up some points.
Hammer it home,
Yeah. So obviously he did get P2 in the championship, albeit really only just. It was still kind of 50-50.
I got a good point on that.
Okay, cool. And like you said, he started very well. He won two of the first 4 races. He was still well on par, and at that stage we're thinking, okay, this could really be on here. But yeah, as you say, Miami was the start of his issues. He qualified P1 and lost to Max, who started, I think, P9. He started P9 because there was a red flag and he couldn't get his lap. I think it was Leclerc went into the wall.
Yes, Charles went off. Yeah.
Yes, so he couldn't get his lap in. So that was like a really good opportunity for him to be like, I can win this. And like you say, Max
take over. He would have been leading the championship at that point.
He would have. Yes, yeah, he would have done. But Max just absolutely flew through the field. Like it was, I think he was up to sort of P3 or P4 within like the first 15 laps or something, which is insane. Yeah. Like it was sort of the first signs that, hey, he's pretty fucking good. Well, actually, no, I say that, but in Saudi he went from P15 to P2. That was pretty dominant.
Yes,
as well.
But still, this was still Miami, arguably a harder track.
Yeah.
It's just like butter.
Yeah, but like these are to point out, Miami was the start. This is 6 tracks in a row, so like weekends in a row. So we had Miami, where he lost to Max, who started P9 despite starting P1, followed by Monaco, in which he crashed out in Q1, so he started P20, and started to resort to a lot of like early season Checo stuff, where he'd just do some desperate lunges and real clumsy crashes, and we saw that again in like late season in Suzuka, where he just went straight into the hairpin, where he just sort of drove into the side of the Haas Magnussen, maybe.
Yes, that sounds about right.
Yeah,
it was him or someone else driving into.
Yep.
Anyway, yes.
Followed by the next weekend in Spain, where he was out in Q2 starting P11, only made his way up to P4. I think I made the remark there is like, yeah, but Max would have made P1 from there. Or at least P2. The very next race, he went to Canada, and the qualifying, if you remember that was like wet to dry. I don't know if it was him or the team, but they made the wrong tyre call in qualifying. He started P12, only made it up to P6 in the race. The very next race went to Austria. In Q2, he had 3 flying laps. All 3 were deleted for track limits.
Right.
He started P15, followed the next race by Silverstone. He was out in Q1 and started P16 because the track evolution was quite huge, and he was the first one out on the last run and just dropped down the order and dropped out in Q1.
And surely because he's in a Red Bull, he still climbed up to get P2 and all of those, right? Because he's in the Red Bull.
No,
sure.
he didn't. No. And that's like, and I know he's said, and it's so obvious, like when you look at that, he's like, yeah, my issues are obviously in qualifying. It's like, yeah, but I also think that
if he's go on.
But also, like, just some of the decisions that either he or his team is making as well.
Yeah.
Like, 2 of those are, like... Well, Austria was, like, deleted track limits, okay, at Austria. That was... You could argue that is sort of its own thing, but
you could almost put it down to bad luck if it's an isolated incident. At
the same time, when you have 3 flying laps and every single one gets deleted, maybe you'd be like, hey, maybe I shouldn't push the limit every single corner on every single
lap. It's
lap.
not like you're close on making it either.
All you need to do is make Q3, which is top 10, and you have a Red Bull where Verstappen's basically getting P1 every single session, or very close to. So, like, you could argue driver error as well. And then you have Silverstone, like I said, they put him out on track. They knew track evolution was huge, so whether it was his choice or whether it was team's choice, like... And then the Canada, the wrong tyre call. I know Leclerc also had that same tyre call, but, you know, Ferrari, you sort of come to expect that from them. But, like, it's just something's not working there. And then, like, when he's under pressure, like he has shown in the last couple of years up until when he started to dip in form, he showed his racecraft was getting a lot better. Like, he was able to send these moves and make them stick, and it was looking really, really good. It was really feisty, but it was really fair. And then when he's like, oh, I'm dipping a bit, or I'm starting way back and I need to make my way, I'm expected to make it back to P2, then he goes back to, like I said, old Checo, and it's like, I'm just going to dive from like 500 meters back and damned be what the other car in front's doing, and just crash into them. And I don't know. I mean, I assume that's just pressure, but I don't know, man. How do you deal with that? It just seems so hard, eh? Like when you have an experienced driver like Checo, and you know he wouldn't have gotten the Red Bull seat if he didn't deserve a seat at a top team. Like I think his last season at Racing Point, he was at the one where he got the win as well. It was. Yeah. So like he had a really, really good season with Racing Point, and like I said, he was a strong contender in that team. So it's not like he obviously got the Red Bull seat for a reason. So it's not like they've just thrown in some crap driver and it's like, oh, you expect that from him. You know, Perez has always been crap. It's like, no, he hasn't. He's been a very good driver who's just it seems to be under this immense amount of pressure that just comes with the Red Bull second seat. But if someone like Checo can't handle it, then who the hell can?
Exactly.
Yeah. I don't know.
Yeah. Oh, it's a good summary, and as I say, it's interesting how it's not like he just jumped in it like the others and was so poor, because as you say, he played such a pivotal, crucial role when he needed to. And even last year, he showed some flashes now and then, not being that bad, taking a pole here and there. But yeah, this was it's amazing that he still got that P2. And I guess it leads into still that question about points, because I think this is a good discussion about how the point system both the point system saved him here and how close everyone else was. Because there was another driver consistently hitting, top positions.
Yes.
He could have been 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, easily. But everyone else was so chaotic. The rise of Aston, the fall of Aston, the rise of McLaren, the fall of McLaren just meant mathematically that, and with the Hamilton disqualification, that he got it. That was
the big thing.
Really on pure luck, because I say luck on so many factors just working out. As I say, like the fact that there was Aston, who was strong, that got so many points but then didn't get many at the end. And then McLaren, who stole a lot from other drivers towards the end that would have otherwise beat him, if they stayed behind, then like both the Ferraris, both the Mercedes drivers might have passed Checo and he would have been all the way back, right? So it's at least that he got it, which you could say is the minimum he needs to do. And he showed some improvement towards the end. I don't think it means we're looking to the new year going, look, he already knows he's on his retirement bed, just enjoy it. I think there's they're still giving him a chance here, right? It's just kind of a trend we're seeing of a few other drivers where, hey, the grid's not changing for a reason, right? And there's a few drivers we thought by the halfway through the year would have been out of there by now.
One of them was.
Well, it's true. One of them was, but after that, right, when you saw, if that's happened to one, then the other three in this bucket aren't safe, and yet they're still here as we see. We just got to see. I don't know. It's more likely to go one way. It could go the other way, though. It's hard to say. I don't know. It's Max, isn't it? As you say, it's the Max factor. I think when I was saying the point I wanted to save before about the points discussion and about how, although he won by so much, it's because he won so much, so he deserves to win by so much, and compounded by the fact there wasn't a consistent driver finishing second the whole time. Like the two Mercedes drivers were fairly close, because even if Hamilton was in the more dominant year, Rosberg was always P2, P2, P3, P2, so that gap wasn't that big. But here, again, you had Alonso P2, P2, and then Norris, and then Hamilton. Oh, there's Sainz. Oh, there's Leclerc. Oh, there's Piastri. And that's why they're all so far back. But we had that close battle for P4, and why it's amazing that even Alonso still got P4. I think that's actually where the point structure in general, at least for P1 to 10, I think actually worked, and I wouldn't change the values really that much myself. We saw it work even for Williams, where Albon putting in those giant killer performances kept them ahead in that P7. That's how they got it, right? Where the AlphaTauri, which was quicker, they just couldn't cash in those performances even when they were quicker. And Alonso somehow held on despite that poor performance because of those consistent P2s, P3s early on, which meant that he just had enough when everyone else was scrambling back and forth. And Russell, who still looks strong, didn't cash in those 1 or 2 P2, P3s he should get, finish best of the rest. So you kind of look at it and you're like, the point structure I think actually worked really well for everyone here. And Max is just ahead because he was the only one consistently winning almost everything. So I just wanted to revisit on that points thing. I think at the bigger pictures, maybe 11 to 12, you could do something. I think the points for top 10 actually worked out pretty well for this season with the type of variety that we had.
We've talked a lot about Checo. Like, we could talk about Max. I feel like every weekend we talk about him.
We're talking about him all year.
So like, it's
not much I want to say.
I don't know if we'll get a season this dominant again. Maybe we will this year, but I find it hard to believe that both Red Bull and Verstappen will be this on song for this year. I think it could be very, very much closer at the top. I think he'll have a lot more at least competition, at least we already saw, particularly with qualifying, like he would always qualify P1 towards the start of the year. He'd have Alonso pretty close, but particularly in the second half of the year, it was not uncommon for him to not be P1. Like, I think
it's another team we'll talk about, right? They were so far off, and yet if you just look at qualifying, you'd thought there'd be a really close team to them.
So we had Ferrari, obviously they took quite a number of poles. We had Hamilton took that one pole, Hungary as well, only just, but and then I think McLaren did get one as well, I want to say.
It might have been sprint pole.
Possibly sprint, yeah. But
But they still were very close. And
very close,
there was
exactly,
a few,
yeah.
arguably, a few should have been pole laps that Norris missed out on.
Exactly,
It easily should
yeah.
have been without a few errors. So
Yep.
it's not like they were ages away.
Yeah, so I feel like, if the, the race pace, obviously, that will start to close up. The Red Bull still definitely had the advantage, even towards the end of the year, but it was closing up quite a bit.
Yeah.
So if the race pace closes up even further come next year, then qualifying matters even more for them, and they can't just be like, oh, we'll just set up a race car and qualify P3, P4, because that might not be enough. So, but we'll have to wait and see. Like, there's so much to talk about when it comes to next season, but I mean, you kind of just have to revel in the fact that, hey, Max was just incredible this season. Like, he was, he and I think he was the only driver to score points in every single race this year. Hamilton got points on every single weekend, but he had a retirement on a sprint weekend on Qatar, and also the disqualification in Kota, but he got points in the sprint, so which is probably what helped him to get P3 in the end, and also so close to P2, because it was just consistently the points. We'll get to Mercedes.
That was the other side, which is just why this, even in a dominant car, this consistency is unheard of, because that car did not break down. We were even suggesting there's got to be one weekend where it breaks down, because there always is. There's always an iconic breakdown. It just didn't happen. It just ran like smooth. I don't know, something. Smooth Red Bull light. I don't know. No, it was really, really good. So it's considering the amount of parts they have for each car as well. Like, you're thinking, you look back to previous years where they had, even an extra part of like an extra ICE or an extra control electronics, whatever it is. And they were still, before 2/3 of the season was up, you would see multiple grid penalties because they're just having to take all these parts or all the failures. We thought that would factor in this year. I think looking halfway through the year, we thought it would get interesting when teams start taking it.
It just never
just
really
no wind
happened.
of it.
You had a few. Obviously, there was some unreliability, but like
or
not
where teams
nearly,
could cash in because they had a poor, qualifying anyway or whatever, and they thought we'll just do it because it's extra performance.
Exactly.
Do we talk about the cost cap question here?
Oh, yeah, okay. I hadn't even considered that. Yeah, that's a good point.
It's basically about Red Bull.
Yes. So... Yeah, true. All right. Well, so this is another question from... It was Crosso, wasn't it? Yes. Correct. So his third point that he had. So, yeah, he had a question saying, will we see Red Bull actually suffer from the cost cap breach? Does the sliding scale aero time play an impact? The fact that you brought it up means you probably have a thought about it, so I'll let you take it away.
I think it's two things. I think one, Red Bull just got it right. There's a reason that now it looks like, as much as teams have tried things, hell, you look at Mercedes tried something daring, and they're even the ones saying we now need to converge to something different that's more Red Bull-like. There's a reason that the Aston launched and they said we've adapted some things we've seen that we like, and they committed early to it in their research for this car, and look how strong it was. There's a reason why the McLaren started looking a bit more like it later in the year, right? And the Haas started fairly strong, which borrowed some characteristics. So I think it's just that... part of the cost cap was going to be you can't just try everything and then you just look at everything and go, because you can spend on everything and then you just pick the best one. You've kind of got to just go with your gut. Again, Mercedes saw something they thought was really niche and they probably could have tried a few things more, but they said, let's just go for it. And it didn't work out. And Red Bull obviously found something. Even with, you forget they had the penalty for overspending on their catering, whatever the fuck it ended up being, right? Human resources, etc. And of course, winning being so consistent, it's still reduced, but they just got it right. And that's even why all the teams were saying, it's still those days where Adrian Newey just, bang for buck.
He's got to be one of the most valuable people in F1 outside of.
And that was part of the point of these rules, was to say if you're a little team, you still get someone good in, and therefore you can extract their value. It's not just spending, on pure just money for resource. It's about spending money wisely. What's the best bang for your buck, right? It's all about bang for your buck. No longer just spend to win, pay to win, right?
Yep.
And it's just that they, just got it right with a brilliant driver, and so I guess that's saying why so far the cost cap doesn't seem to have hurt them. I think it's also still, as we said a few times, but the field is still closest it's ever been.
Yep.
Teams like Haas and Williams, which were on the verge of bankruptcy and COVID, are now quite comfortable and are even to the point trying to reject other teams because they're saying, this is the first time ever we've got it really comfortable. We don't want to destabilize this because this is great.
Yeah. I think overall, even some of the just to add on to that point, some of the lower teams, I don't know which one it was maybe Alfa Romeo or Haas, but one of them said like they're still not even operating at the cost cap, like they still don't have enough to even operate at the cost cap. So if they had the funds to even operate to the same level, could it be even closer again? So I think that's probably why they wanted to, they could have just been like the cost cap at the absolute lowest level from the get-go and just completely screw the top teams. And that sort of seems unfair. The way they've done it, where it's sort of like, hey, cost cap, and then every year we'll sort of bring it down slowly, like a sliding scale. So I think regarding the cost cap, I do think it's gonna take a little while because it has to be this sort of like progression based thing to avoid really screwing over one team over another. I think it will take a few years to sort of see the fruits of it, to see the whole picture of it. But I think once we get to a point where those lower teams are operating at the cost cap, and they even have extra funds, and they're like, okay, now they have to choose which way they want to go. I think that's when you could start to see some real close, like the midfield basically become the field again. So I think it is sort of a sliding scale, but I don't know if it's like you say. I think Red Bull just got it right. So because if they had got it wrong, then maybe their cost cap breach might have affected them a bit more. But because they just got it right, I think they've sort of mitigated that by just being like, hey, we just got it right first try.
They just did a bang up job. It's and they're fortunate enough where again they have a stellar driver in it. So they might have looked less impressive with any other driver. It's hard to say. And I guess the counterpoint, not to hammer on this too much, is that you say, well, what happens if you get rid of the cost cap? Do other teams then get more funds, like your likes of Ferrari and your likes of Mercedes can just spend up to suddenly catch up to them? But then it's like, Red Bull could they be even more dominant? They're trying to talk up. I think partly Red Bull, part the media are even trying to talk up next year, saying that this is just on another level concept. They could have already had this next level concept this year, for all we know, right? They could have been so much further ahead, right? Like you just don't know. And as we say, and then how much does that hurt everyone else? Yes, it's about the front, but you've got to look at the whole field. It's the most dominant season, yet it's the closest season. How can you have those two factors? It's
it is weird, isn't it?
Maybe have a closer season at the front, but then you've got a super spread out season. Haas then leave, Williams leave, and then what the fuck? Yeah, you wouldn't rock this. I think, you want to change things as soon as you see it's not super close for that P1, but I feel like
it's premature.
Still give it a few years at this point. There's so many positives that have come through this. Like, you can have a few negatives, you're not going to get them all. So...
No, 100% agree.
That was my thought anyway. It was an interesting thing to think about anyway. So
it's good. All right. Well, let's move on to Alpha Tauri then, which, believe it or not, was actually the first one that came up in the randomizer. Say, you're just
changing the order? Or?
Yeah, no. It just literally it was actually the next one that came up. I'm like, oh, that's convenient. So Alpha Tauri, they ended up 8th in the championship with 25 points. Tsunoda getting 17 of those, ending P14. De Vries obviously getting 0 of those, ending P22 out of a field of 20 drivers. It's always odd to see. Ricciardo getting 6 points for P17 and Lawson getting 2 points for P20. Qualifying
despite
heads...
not being on the grid,
Yes, qualifying
ahead of two drivers.
Tsunoda 4-3 versus Ricciardo, so it was relatively close for the races they had. Tsunoda 4-1 against Lawson, although I think that's somewhat misleading because I think he was pretty close in terms of like time, but 4-1 to Tsunoda and 8-2 to Tsunoda versus De Vries as well. I actually didn't realize he got him twice, but that's interesting as well. But AlphaTauri, you kind of have to talk about them in the same vein as Red Bull, especially as it's going to become much closer to Red Bull.
You're going to talk about them a lot more in the vein of Red Bull next year. That's
they're going to be the other
that's a
RB
2024
team.
conversation.
Yeah, RB and then RB2. Now that they're going to be the Racing Bulls, which I don't.
Yes. Anyway,
God.
2024, but this year.
Yep. I don't know.
What did you think?
It was a tumultuous
Drivers aside,
season.
I think you've got two things. You've got all these driver changes, but I think even the story of the car was really interesting too.
Because they were one of those teams, like I said, one of the 4 teams towards the back. And I would argue that on a lot of weekends, they were one of the worst teams, and particularly
especially in the first half of the year.
Yeah, first half of the race. Funnily enough, the first 10 races, which is the races that De Vries were in. But even Tsunoda, like if he got into a Q3, you're like, or got even close to the point, you're like, oh, he's done pretty well there. Like I think he's extracted a lot out of that car. Then once they started to bring updates. Obviously Ricciardo jumped back in the car once they ditched De Vries. I mean, I don't know if we've talked about this. Do you think it was the right call to dump him after 10 races? Like it's a tricky one. I know.
I think it was. What I'm thinking is, I guess, I don't know. There's something. It's like 10 thoughts that came. There's so much to unpack with this bloody team.
There is, yeah. That's why I was like, I'm just going to stop and talk about this one
with
point.
With De Vries, they wouldn't have got this close to P7. That's the point I was trying to say. I don't think you even see them up to that point getting close to it. Even though you look at Ricciardo coming in and out and then Lawson coming in and out, but they still did a fine job. And ultimately, we know the reason that they missed P7, but De Vries would have only, I think, hurt that chance rather than aided towards it.
Yeah, fair.
I still think it was brutal, but I think it's still in that case of Red Bull's always been brutal. And I think, again, bigger picture, they saw this Ricciardo line. If you've listened to his Beyond the Grid that he did podcast as well, he kind of told his side of the story, and it sounds like, he wasn't really thinking about this, but then Red Bull just liked what they saw. They liked how he was talking. He did a test in the Red Bull, I think, and they just saw something amazing, that they just hadn't seen from any of the others, and they thought, we've just got to try this, I
remember him talking about, like, he obviously didn't want to divulge too much, but apparently he was saying he jumped in that Red Bull and literally lap 1, he's like, yeah, I was like lap 1, I was so close to Max, I would have put it on the front row next to Max.
It was close to that. I think he said, yes, in that first time out in the car. I don't think it was lap 1, but it was the first time.
I thought it was lap 1. I thought that's what he said. I thought he said first flying lap, I should say.
Maybe it was his first push lap. I think he did a few, because he said he spun a little bit on the first lap and he was a little bit nervous, but he was just getting used to things. I think his first real guns to limit confident lap was the one that he did, and he basically had near that pace. Slightly different conditions, but he said he thinks it was comparable, and he thinks that was the test where I think like that in any sense that might have brought him into the talk for 2024.
Yes.
But I guess they saw the De Vries situation and they saw the Checo thing, and they probably just went, look, this is the lunar eclipse lining up. Let's just take advantage of it. And I think it's hard. I haven't seen many people critique that too hard. If he wasn't in that picture, maybe De Vries gets a few more, right?
Well, I feel like even because it wasn't even the mid-season break. Like, I feel like you could have at least given him to the mid-season break to try and show something. Maybe nothing would have come of it, but like the fact that it was 10 races and, you only had another, 3 or 4 races until the mid-season break. I don't know. Maybe they.
It's just a shame.
Yeah,
we both wanted to see him do so well. We'll, when we see it, we'll react to it. We were both so excited for it.
No idea what you mean.
So well in FE.
Yeah, I've got no idea what you mean. I didn't predict anything.
I'm glad he's landed on his feet coming out of it. But it's
because it could have been a career killer, like very easily. So it's
just like it should have worked. Come on, I'm back being annoyed at it. But it's hard to know,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and like you say, like now Red Bull have this kind of, not so much Perez, but like they have this Red Bull as a family have this scenarios like, okay, we've got all these options of these like really quality drivers now that can just jump straight in, and we know they're going to perform from race 1. So, and I think that's something that they wouldn't have had if they maybe had kept De Vries in the car. So, Yeah, anyway, where was I? Yeah, so moving on from De Vries, obviously Ricciardo comes in from Hungary because it was after Silverstone he got booted. So, and it was, I think, in Silverstone he out-qualified Tsunoda literally that first weekend he came in, and he's already faster than Tsunoda in qualifying. So it's like, okay, he's back. I feel like that's something that we sort of not so much expected, but we sort of came in thinking like, if he's been given this opportunity, we expect him to be at least like a tenth or within a tenth of Tsunoda in terms of qualifying.
Yes,
if they've
at
seen
his
that
level
much,
or exceeds it. If he's behind, it's not good enough.
And he did exceed it to his fair enough. He exceeded it and showed why the team backed him to be in that team, to be in Alpha Tauri. So I think he only got, was it 2 races before he broke his hand in the Dutch Grand Prix? It was not long because he came back and had a couple of, or at least at Hungary he did really well. I think Spa was a bit of a mixed weekend for him. I think he had one really. He had track limits. He should have qualified out of Q1, and then he had a track limits in the race.
Yeah.
And then he did okay in the sprint, I think. But
yes.
So he did, like, he obviously showed that he was still good, and then must have been the Dutch Grand Prix after that. So yeah, I know he only had a couple of...
It sounds about right. Yeah, that was about the thing. He didn't have too many in, unfortunately, for the innocuous bump.
Yes.
Not something we've seen in a while. You know, you see a massive accident, sure, but it shows the fragility of human beings, right? Something an innocuous bump can take you out of things.
Definitely, yeah.
And I guess in that midterm, fortunately, we had a replacement which actually turned out to be quite a spark and blow things. As if the Red Bull AlphaTauri kind of talk on seats, wasn't complicated enough. This just added more to it.
Yeah. It even added more like talk to... Funnily enough, it added more talk to Sargent's seat as well, because his was only the only seat that was under threat, and it's like, well, now Lawson doesn't have a seat because they've got Ricciardo in there. Ricciardo's going to come back, and they've got Lawson here that's obviously a proven talent, and then everyone's like, well, Sargent's not doing well, why can't we just put him in the Williams? So it's funny how like you don't even have to be part of a conversation at all. And then one person comes into another team and it should be part of the Red Bull conversation. Suddenly you're like, well, what has this got to do with me? Like, it's silly season sometimes like that can be a bit crazy, as we've seen in the past.
It was the best we got for silly season as well this year. So we grabbed onto it as soon as it was there.
Definitely, yeah. So, but yeah, he did. I think he jumped into the Dutch Grand Prix, which I think he jumped straight into qualifying, which was like those mixed and wet conditions. So he went into a Grand Prix, one of the craziest Grand Prix weekend, and still, he held his own. He didn't immediately crash, so that was something.
He didn't bin it, and he finished the line, and everyone said, what a bloody hero.
Yes, yeah, like to jump in without any practice into a wet, dry quali, and then into the... I don't even... How do you describe that race? But
some of the hardest conditions the drivers probably drove all year.
Yeah, outside of
a lot of drivers did bin it, make mistakes, and he kept his cool about it, and then came into the next weekend fresh, and seemed like he'd been that seat all year, to be honest, from then on out.
Yeah, it did seem that way. I think the point that really stuck out to me, like, or the race that really showed me he was like meant to be there, was probably Japan when he was fighting Tsunoda. Like, and he was in that
first stint, he was like, "You're not getting by me, mate. We're gonna have a duel."
Yeah, and it showed that his racecraft is there. And he's
it was risky. If he binned it or took the other teammate out, that would have been it.
Yep.
He went for it, and he put a stake down to say, "You should get me in a car next year."
And they didn't get the car, so
no,
that worked perfectly for him.
Yeah, they played that card almost the Piastri card or others, where they said, "We've seen what you've done. You're a mega. We have to get you somewhere in 2025. If by the end of 2024 you're not somewhere, right?" Which
And to be honest, this is still probably one of his best chances is the Red Bull family, because of the volatility of that second Red Bull seat. It does feel like this is, maybe outside of that second Williams seat, this is still his best chance. But so I think it's probably still the right call to be like, hey, this is good. Like, at least with Piastri, being in the Alpine Academy, he could have seen McLaren and be like, I it was sort of a 50-50 whether which team was going to be the right way to go.
And he'd staked his claims to others too. You know, you didn't need to go talk to someone at Alpine to understand Piastri's credentials. You just Google his name, right? Well, Lawson is a little more... Obviously, Red Bull still had him in their books as a competent driver, but if you're external, you know, there was no reason to pick him, you know, over any other 3 or 4 drivers still in that, you know, kind of decent at F3, F2 bucket in Super Formula level, right?
Yeah.
So, but yeah, it's obviously to stay at Red Bull, and he talked very frankly about it in his I already forgot it, Beyond the Grid podcast as well, where he said no as soon as he was called up after the Dutch Grand Prix. He could have just enjoyed it as a ride, as, you know, other drivers who have subbed in the past. I'm thinking of like Jack Aitken and such.
Yeah, or even Hulkenberg before he came back.
Exactly.
Full-time.
Yes. Where they saw it, you know, they should still do well, but it's very unlikely to into something bigger.
Yep.
But Lawson said no, like, although I've got to get it from A to B, this could actually be the chance. If I don't get it here, looking at the other rookies coming in, looking at the fact that Ricciardo was just signed in, which was a statement to say we're going to use Ricciardo over a rookie, and the fact they hadn't been Tsunoda yet, and they're still saying we want to still develop him further.
Yeah.
It was very unlikely that, you know, he was just going to go, all right, I'll just turn up and then I'm going to come in a few years, right? The fact that he knew that, and that was his mindset coming in, kept it safe in Zandvoort where he could have done something dumb, and then knew in I was going to say in Singapore, in Japan, that he that he had. Well, in Singapore he did well. Actually, he did well in Singapore, and he was down on himself because he thought he should do better. That was still a good example. He still got points, and he's like, I should have been higher than this. I'm sorry, you know. And his team were like, this is fine. He's like, no. I'm trying to prove that, you know, this is I want to be here, and he did that quite well. I think it leads into actually the question we got from one Matt man who wanted to know
I didn't
our
see
thoughts
this one.
on this topic.
Oh God.
Yes. Well, he was basically saying his mate Tsunoda and Ricciardo and Lawson and Perez. Point one was next year, will each of them, who are on the grid, I guess, do better or worse, which I guess we're talking about. And then also, where do we see them all by the end of next year? How do we think it's all going to play out between the 4 of them?
Right, yeah. Yeah.
So anyway, I've waffled on a bit, but I'll let you go on.
It's a hell of a thing to heap on me. A lot of this is, at least the second part of that question, is it's going to play into my 2024 season predictions.
Of course,
so,
better or worse though? What do you think? All right, we'll go through. So Perez, I think we talked about him a bit. Do you think he will actually improve, or do you think maybe it's looking a bit?
I don't think so. No, I think it could be an even harder season for him because I think, like I said, he, and maybe I didn't actually say. Maybe I just thought this. I don't know what I say and think.
You said
anymore.
a fair bit, yeah. You gave the vibe that it wasn't looking hopeful, right?
Yeah, well, it's. I think this season he was exceptionally lucky that the Red Bull was as dominant as it was.
Exactly.
And if I think it's going to be closer at the top next year, I think Perez, if he doesn't improve, I think a lot of his flaws will be even greater than they have shown this year. So I don't. Yeah. And seeing how he starts to drive under pressure when he starts to lose the sort of that I'm a winner championship mentality to I've got to catch up. The second he does that, and how he gets clumsy and it sort of desperate, becomes the desperate moves and things. The way it's almost immediately resorting to that. I don't really hold much hope for him, unfortunately. So I don't think he'll do. If he does do better this year, it'll be pretty marginal. But I don't think it'll be enough. So Max, I think, will just keep doing Max things. I mean,
Max wasn't even in the question. It's fine. I guess it is. In general, you don't have to say which, but Lawson, do you think by 25 Red Bull will hold their word and have him on the grid somewhere?
I think so, yeah. I think you can't. I think the second he doesn't have a seat in 2025 is like...
We go back to talking about the Red Bull Junior thing failing again, which we had semi-recently.
And then you start having, you only have to look back a couple of years to, a year or two to Piastri. Then then he moves to another team and then he excels there, and then you've missed out on an opportunity to have an absolute gun in your team that could have helped your team to grow. And we'll talk about sort of Alpine and McLaren, that's another thing. But like,
The only thing that's hard to know is whether we think there's another junior that will challenge the ranks.
Well, that's the thing.
I think you would have seen part of it this year. I believe Iwasa is going to Super Formula.
Yes.
But again, Lawson had laid such a strong stake. He almost won that bloody thing on his first attempt.
Yep, and he also should have won DTM as well on his very first attempt.
So even if Iwasa goes over and somehow wins it, which I'm not saying somehow to discredit him, I'm saying that's a very competent championship. So anyone that does well there, similar to how Gasly had to prove himself there, and he did, right? And then we saw how well he's gone on, right?
Yep.
So there could be one, but yeah, Lawson, took the conversation from, I'm trying to remember who else it was with. I guess we'll talk about it when we talked about our preview for our predictions for 2024. We brought up a few names and who we thought was leading.
Yeah, I think it was. I think I remember yours because I'm looking at the Red Bull Junior team.
I know mine. I don't remember yours.
Yeah. So the other drivers that who are in Formula 2, they have Ollie Goethe and Arvid Lindblad, but they're in Formula 3 and they won't jump straight to Formula 1. Formula 2, you have Isaac Hadjar, who's shown moments, and then you've got Pepe Marti, who is I think Formula 3, he had a kind of a mixed bag season where he showed moments of brilliance, and then he seems like a bit of a kind of mistake prone, but obviously has a lot of pace. So I'd be curious. I think those two drivers, but I think particular Pepe Marti, I'd be very, very curious to see how he does in the Formula 2 season. But there's no one outside of Lawson. I don't know about Iwasa. I don't know. I don't think I've seen enough. Like I said, unless he wins Super Formula, if
Red Bull were desperate, I don't think he's that bad a pick.
Yeah,
but
they're not desperate.
They're not.
Exactly. So I just don't. Yeah, I don't really see him in the picture, unfortunately. But he'd have to do something like unbelievable to get his name in the like actual genuine picture for the Red Bull. But I feel like Lawson, he has to have a seat by 2025 somewhere, whether it's an Alpha Tauri or whether it's somewhere else. If he's not in there, then something's failed with the junior formula academies and the F2 program. The whole point of what's the F3, F2 is like, they call it the road to F1, but is it really? It's seeming less and less. Théo Pourchaire as well, who we'll talk about a bit later, wins F2, and he's looking unlikely to get a seat.
And who won the prior year as well?
Exactly. Yeah, like
with a Lance Stroll. I guess we'll get onto them soon.
So and the last 3 years, the people who have won the F2 championship have not gotten a direct seat into F1. Like Piastri even took a couple of years. Like he had to take a seat out, despite winning F3, going to F2, winning F2, and then a year off, and then wasn't supposed to get a seat the next year again. So he's like, cool, I'm going to go look at another team, and then got a seat there. And then you have Dragovic, who's just sitting in the wings and looking like he won't ever get a seat at Aston Martin. And then you got Pourchaire, who's going to be sitting in the wings and never going to get a seat. So
it's not looking like road to F1. It's looking like road to successful, but not F1 IndyCar or sports car campaign.
Yes.
It's great for WEC because all the hypercar programs are like, look at all these bloody young gun juniors who don't have drives. Come race for our new hypercar. We'll pay you millions because this is the next hot thing. Don't worry about F1 or IndyCar, which is blowing up again. And, they're cycling through drivers again. A few drivers, I think, I want to say Christian Lundgaard, I think, has done well, and a few others have done very well. That have jumped over. So... But it's not F1, which is the whole point of it. It's not. We're not talking about. This is going to turn into Indy Lights 2 or something at this point. And it goes down to, again, we've talked about them for a long time now. But it's Ricciardo and it's Yuki, which I think, again, both of them towards the end showed enough where you don't feel bad about them retaining them. But it's really hard to know in the new year. You could see. You feel like they're either going to rise or fall. And if they kind of stay the same, one or both of them are probably going to get turfed out for Lawson and potentially someone else, right? I don't remember what we said about 2024 being a year for change. I feel like it wasn't one for much because, again, a trend that we saw was that teams wanted to have drivers that for the first few years the new regs would be there to hone the car in to get everything working, which literally has played out as we were saying. But now that that's kind of played out, the teams are all converging to one kind of car. Now it is for the 2025-26. who's the best driver that you've got that can drive the bloody thing.
Yep.
So I feel like that's when we might see a lot of this change, which we'll have to get into. So
yeah, well, even with I won't spend too much time on this, but the Audi project as well for 26. Looking to what drivers, and there's a lot of talk about, we want Carlos Sainz, or we want this driver, or we want that
Norris,
driver.
We want a Porsche, we want a Drogovic.
Like who are they actually looking at? Because they obviously want a good, solid driver lineup there. So that kind of brings into the question. And then obviously you got the talk about the Andretti project. It's like, we got all these young drivers and all the teams are pushing back on having the Andretti team. It's like, there we go. We've got a team that can, there's another two spots.
Probably take an American driver and probably take a
junior, yeah.
Solid junior.
They seem pretty set on bringing a Colton Herta type, or if not Colton Herta.
Yes.
Someone like Colton Herta or Colton Herta. And potentially or at least even maybe someone more experienced on the grid. Like I'm thinking, let's just say, for example, a Hulkenberg. Maybe he goes he goes to Andretti and he's like the steady
Gasly or an
Gasly, someone like that. Someone who's been in the sport for years and years and can sort of work alongside her to sort of build that team and try and do that. But that even still, that opens up now another spot at a team for potentially a junior driver. But the teams, they have this sort of like, they always talk about, there's so many young drivers and they're not getting a spot on the grid, and but we don't want more teams which will provide more spots on the grid. It's like, well, what do you want? Like, you can't have
and as you said, it's just that value of experience matters so much as well. It's why, look at Haas, they had two young guns. They're back to having one of their older drivers they had, and Hulk, who you could say it was just there for a spare, because that experience really mattered at this time. But I feel like it happened when you look back a bit. I feel like this always happens. Like, we had the whole scenario of, like Lando and Charles and all that coming in, and they kind of came in at a point where it's settled. But prior to that, there wasn't that much change. It was more two teams swapping drivers rather than pulling from outside. So I think this happens. I think this trend kind of happens. And I guess it is just the effect of losing teams like Manor, who used to pull in, the F2 rookie, or someone like Mercedes, put a Veerline in there, or Russell went to Williams, right? And, Williams do have Sargent, and maybe they should have gotten rid of him, but that's another question, right? It's the only seat where maybe Williams put out a Sargent, put someone in, then this conversation probably wouldn't be happening, because at least one kind of rookie kind of got in there, right? But Sargent, you could say, is still kind of a rookie getting his second year chance, and it's hard to say, right? But
yeah, that's fair. And I feel like
we should.
I was gonna say, like, just to reiterate a point. I think we
close it all out.
That maybe we pointed out at the start of the season, like, or at least in the predictions that we did, is that because of the whole rule change thing and how severe it is, these teams want to find a set combo that can help push the car forward. So they're reluctant to swap and change these drivers, which creates a little bit more volatility in the team and potentially could lose the positions, particularly with how much closer it is. Having those two set drivers is, having that bit of consistency does definitely help. So I feel like when you say there's phases, I reckon if you look back, you could probably see these phases every time there's a big rules change.
Exactly.
So, but yeah, definitely 25, I think there could be some big shakeups. I think over half the grid is out of contract into 2024. So, and from
that performance factor, it sort of mattered here, but you feel like next year, that performance factor with everyone being so close, a few points could lose you, so many places, and
definitely. All right, well, let's move on to number 3. I had was Mercedes. So Mercedes ended up second. At 409 points.
Fought second.
Well fought, yeah. Like I said, with Hamilton, his consistency in getting into the points definitely helped quite a lot. Hamilton scoring 234 points to get P3. Russell scoring 175 points to get P8. They did get, I think it's the only team to get a tied qualifying head-to-head. They both got 11 apiece. As we know, Russell's strength is qualifying. We saw that at Williams when they were right at the bottom. He could pull the biggest bullshit lap out of his
strength is, I guess it's consistent qualifying. He can't pull that god lap out, but he's good at just putting a consistent lap together.
Yeah, that too. So I feel like This year in particular, we've said it a lot as well over the course of the year, and maybe even last year, where yes, Russell is strong and he's a very, very good driver, particularly when you compare him to, say, a Bottas. I think he is a stronger second driver in that Mercedes. He just doesn't have the edge to Hamilton, particularly in his racecraft. He feels just a rung below, and I feel like that was particularly, you can even see in the point standings and even some of the errors that he made in his racecraft, where you're like, it's sort of brought that more to the forefront. It's kind of highlighted it a bit more than it has maybe last season. So where Hamilton has that, you hear him complain on the radio all the time, but he still has that kind of that calmness factor to him, and that consistency, particularly under pressure and also moving through the field as well. Like he just has that edge over Russell, and Russell will, he's known for this, at least this season, he made a couple of real bold strategy calls, whether that was team related as well, but some of them worked, some of them didn't, but particularly under pressure. I think about, Singapore's obviously the big one, where he was under pressure from Hamilton from behind, trying to push through. I think when they made that pit stop and he was trying to make his way through the field, it took him like a few laps to get past Leclerc. And then once he did, then Hamilton's like, okay, on that same lap or the lap later, okay, he's past Leclerc immediately. Yeah. Like, it just feels like it takes Russell. I might have even talked about this in the Singapore debrief because I remember it so vividly. How it's like it takes Russell a little bit longer to build up to a lot of those moves. He can still pull them off because his racecraft is good. It's just not... Hamilton has that confidence to be able to do it right away. Like, he doesn't have to build up to it. He can just do it from the get-go, and he can still put in those consistent laps, and he can still pull off those moves. And I just feel like it's just a step above what Russell is able to do. So.
I think one way to look at it, I mean, the results speak for themselves. And would you say he's had a bad year, Mercedes should start looking into Junior? No, I think you still see him as the future. You wouldn't say it's poor at all. The team did get P2, and he certainly helped to contribute to that. And 100%. He certainly had some, as you say, the qualifying battle was head-to-head with Lewis Hamilton. Even just that fact alone is like, that's fine. There's not many people you could say that would confidently be able to do that, right? Yes. Save leaguers, Jensen Button, others of that pedigree, right? It's almost like when you look at like each driver in that top, let's say those top 4 teams, if you're looking at McLaren, it's basically the 4 teams except for Aston, that's what I'm thinking of here, right? And the 8 drivers in there. It's almost like each of them did have some sort of shining moment, but it's hard to think of one for Russell this year. The year prior, he had one when he won in Brazil, which was amazing, right? And yet this year, he had a few that were almost there, and they just didn't come to fruition. While Sainz had the win, Hamilton had the pole and a few amazing things. Checo still won twice. Piastri won a sprint. Yep. Norris had enough to get P2s and all that, and to do some amazing things. And Leclerc, had so many poles and still enough there. And yet Russell, it's just like, it's like we said, with this year being so close, it is those little moments where you just got to grab it that will just keep you above everyone else. And everyone else got one, and he just didn't have one. And I think just what slipped him out a bit. And that's no discredit to him, but that's what he needs to be able to, be P4, P5, rather than where he is.
I do think, because this is actually a point that I made looking back at the highlights, I think he was exceptionally unlucky in Australia to not pull out one of those results. There was some
bad luck in there as well.
I think he
heard him on the radio sometimes, obviously saying, what are we doing, right?
Yeah, but particularly, obviously he had a chance in Singapore to win that race with the strategy. It looked good, but he couldn't obviously make the move. Yeah. Partly because I feel like, again, it goes back to he just can't. I feel like he can't really stick the move, but also the Sainz brilliance out in front to not allow him to make that move. And then obviously the crash into the wall. Like it's little things like that. I mean, the crash into the wall is pretty big, but it was sort of very fine margins.
But it's so hard to blame him for that.
Yeah, the Australia one, I think he started P2 on the grid, and he was into
That's right.
T1 in the lead and actually doing quite well. He got very, very unlucky because he pitted under the safety car, and then it turned into a red flag.
Stuffed by it.
Yes, and it set him back to like P4 or P5, and then his engine failed anyway. So, but he was looking really, really quick, and on a track that, while there was more overtaking this year, it's pretty tough to overtake in Australia. And he had a genuine chance to win that race until...
with how we saw it play out, I think,
I think he had a real chance there, but... like you are right. I do think that he didn't have that aha moment. Like you look at the Williams where
the times when he had something in his control, right? Every driver has something where it's out of their control and something unlucky happens, right? But the times when he did have something that he could have done, he just missed out on it, right?
Oh,
and as we said, that
the other point I had is remember Canada when he went into the wall and there was that big the four train. I think it was Max, Alonso, Hamilton, Russell were all pretty close to each other, running together at the front in Canada, and he went into the wall.
And he hit that wall halfway around the track.
Yes.
He went wide and thwacked it. That was one where he could have converted something.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so it's Anyway, go on. I just wanted to point that out because that's just another example.
It's a good reminder. I guess it's almost like another year where if you're gonna make mistakes, make them now. If like Mercedes are challenging next year, you'd hope that these are almost lessons learned, right? And then he can be up there. But it's also, as I say, the points you see P8, but it doesn't reflect the position compared to the others, right? It's not like he's just down there because he's consistently finishing behind them all.
Yeah.
It's just because of how close they all were. So, but. Yeah, I don't know. I guess we'll talk mainly about Russell just because Hamilton... It's interesting because when looking at even people who are ranking drivers, and normally you almost always go, oh, Hamilton's easily in the top 3 of any year. But was he even in a top 3 driver this year? Max was obviously number 1. You could easily put a few drivers ahead of him.
Yep.
Some had him P4, some had him P5. Still strong.
Yep.
But that brilliance, just like he had some instances, but there wasn't as much as normal.
Yeah.
He seemed to just be like, we had this change where days where the car was strong and he seemed to be like, yes, like this is the return. This is how we're going to do it.
Yeah.
And then it was poor and he didn't just go, it's just a bump. He'd be like the complete opposite. He'd just let it get to him. He'd almost start to give up, rather than just trying to make the most of it. Whereas others, like you feel like the Ferrari drivers, even when they had bad weekends, were still just always trying to do something. Even if it went to disaster, they were just like, always trying. No matter what they were given. Yet Hamilton tried on his day where it was good, and the day where it was poor, he kind of came in with half an effort.
Yep.
Which we haven't really seen from him before. So
it's interesting.
He kind of got hidden because there was so much else going on, but it feels like almost his worst performance in himself because there was just a few others, that just seemed to have more of those, amazing, moments and just an overall better performance drive than him.
I feel like how do I want to word this?
Yeah, no.
I almost want to say the team environment doesn't help that a lot, particularly when you've got someone like Toto, who is also, he's kind of the same as Hamilton, who's like, who will, the second they have a slightly poor weekend where they're not a second or third fastest team, they're just like, we know it's shit, and he's super down about it. And it's like, I feel like they were so used to winning that anything that's not like top 1 or 2 is like it's an abject failure for them. And they're just so down. And when you have the literal top man at the team, being depressed and telling his drivers like, we know it's shit, just please drive it. We know it's a terrible car. We're sorry, it's a terrible car. We'll do better. And it's like, you can't be saying that. Like, you need to. I think
it's that contrast you actually get from Russell, even in those races where he'd been stuffed around or whatever. He was still on the radio going, almost perking the team up. Yeah, he'd be like, "Can we try something?" He'd be like, "Let's at least try get some points." Even if he was in 14th, 15th, something unfortunate happened, or starting, even 10th, 9th, you'd still hear him on the radio going, "Can we at least, try something? What's the guy ahead on?" He was. I guess because he comes from that Williams mindset where it's always, what can we grab? And it's almost like he's still in that with Mercedes on some days because it is so poor and he's still just like, let's grab it. But Hamilton comes from that other side where the comparison for him is this is the worst of the worst. While for Russell, it can still be some of his best days because compared to a Williams, it's still the best thing ever, right?
Yeah, true.
And yet Hamilton just, I guess, still just cashed in where he could. As we say, Russell in those days where it really mattered just didn't get it, and it kind of swung those ways. But as I say, we talked a few years about, is this Hamilton's last year, like, is he still going to go for another championship? And we're not really talking about it now because he's kind of said, nah, I'm still comfortable for a while. I'm enjoying it. I guess we're all seeing what Alonso can do, so we know age doesn't really matter.
True.
But it's like, but if you had another year of this, would this still be enough? Or would he just go,
I'm done.
You feel like he has, tried to hold it in when he can, but he's almost like, right, you went down this design flow, which he seems to try to hide it, but we hear this comment of him saying he went to the team and he tried to tell them something and they went a different way, and now it's gone wrong. So he's almost got a bit of a tone in his voice going, I told you so. If you do it again, then obviously we're just a different, we're obviously just not the Hammond McLaren team anymore, Mercedes team rather. You just leave, So
it is interesting.
Interesting year next year.
Yes.
I think whether they're doing well or poor, it'll be interesting for Hamilton. They're either going to do well and he's going to be in it, or they're going to do well and he's not going to be there. Who knows, right? Yeah. Or they'll do poor and then, well, let's see.
He does have a contract till the end of 2025, but I'd be very surprised if there's not some kind of clause.
He has a contract till the end of his life. That's fine.
I'd be very surprised if there's not some kind of clause in there that says he can exit early if such and such.
I see what you're saying. You mean the inverse?
End of 2024. 100%. He could. I reckon there'd be some clause he could be like, I want to leave.
He's not in F1 because he's bored. He's got plenty else he could do, isn't it? Because he loves racing. But, some of the Alonso factor almost. He wants to be in it to be chasing something. So it'd be interesting.
Yeah.
Anyway,
well, let's move on to the next team. We've got Alpine was the next one that showed up. They, as we sort of alluded to,
they sort of spend about 2 minutes, right?
Sure. Yeah.
Well, you're repping them. What have you got?
Well, I don't know what you mean. I don't. Nope. They sort of ran their own little championship this year. They were 6th in the championship.
How many times can they take each other out or crash out and still retain midfield?
Very true, yeah. They had 120 points. They were nowhere close to Aston in 5th, and they were nowhere close to Williams in 7th, so they were very much in their own little world there. Sort of back end of the points for the most part. Sometimes they'll have a good performance. You think about Ocon getting the P3 in Monaco, and then Gasly getting the P3 in Zandvoort, I believe it was. Also,
they had some killer giant performances.
Yep.
The kind of team where if they just cashed in each weekend, they probably would have been in a decent fight for that P4 in the constructors, because you had two teams that kind of swept around them almost, but they just dropped the marbles at every opportunity they seemed to, which was fine if they wanted the P6, but they could have actually had a P5 or a P4 if
could possibly
they let the others be the ones dropping the marbles.
They were relatively close on points. Ocon 58 points, Gasly on 62. They were P12 and P11 respectively.
Correct.
Qualifying head-to-head was 14-8 Gasly, which actually surprised me. I thought it would be closer than that. I don't know. To be fair, I didn't really look at the qualifying at Alpine sort of across every race to see if it was close or the gaps were big or whatever. What I did notice is that it feels like each driver has a style of track that they like, because it felt like every weekend you would have a driver that's just like, they just look really on it, like one of the two, Ocon or Gasly, is on it, the other one just can't quite get there, and then a weekend later, a couple of weekends later, you'd have exactly the opposite, and you'd have the other driver way up and the other one struggling to catch up as well. So which I thought was pretty interesting, but they still end up being right next to each other in terms of points and position on the championship.
And what's more significant about that is that Gasly was new to this team this year.
Yes,
Ocon has been here for how long? 4 years? 5 years? And yet, in a general season where you'd say luck and all sorts, Ocon may be a bit unlucky, but he's been here for 5 years. And this was supposed to be his team that he was going to take to the top with them. Gasly comes in, who sure is strong, but he's new. And you'd argue when you look back, he had in general better performances seems to be the general case. I think for Gasly that just means he still just had a fine year from his perspective. If you're ranking the drivers, you'd put him average, maybe a bit above average.
Yeah.
Ocon, I think it's probably good they're out of the limelight because I think this looks really bad. I think it's like, what is he going to do from here? What's his plan? He's just going to try stay here. If they have a junior coming through who's a giant killer, they're probably if they look at their two drivers, unless there's a massive change next year, but this year was kind of a good trend. We were going to see either Ocon take the lead with Alonso leaving and be the number one, and he kind of let Gasly walk over him a little bit, which for two drivers similar in their career, in that kind of, where Hulkenberg was a few years ago and Checo was a few years ago, trying to almost show something and, maybe find their way into a better position. He kind of didn't do it. As I say, he didn't do bad, but he shouldn't have done good. He should have done pretty great.
Yeah.
But he didn't.
Yeah.
It doesn't look good for his future. I feel like he's just going to fizzle out in 1 or 2 years when Alpine finds something that fits better for their build and they're going to keep Gasly on at this rate.
Yeah, maybe.
Don't know if you agree with that, but...
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like yes and no. Like, I feel like he did... compared to Gasly, I still think Ocon, over the course of the season, I still think his performances were overall better than Gasly.
But were they that much better?
I don't know. Yeah, like you look at the amount of like they had a lot of DNFs. Gasly had 3, Ocon had 7. You don't think about Ocon had 7 DNFs. So 2 of them were double DNFs.
From what I've heard, and I am partly biased by when I've listened to a lot of, I guess, others talk about this, who have kind of taken those more head-to-head kind of weekends where they were just genuinely on similar kind of pace and taking, bad luck and all that out of the equation, right?
Yeah, okay.
That's kind of what I've heard it from. So,
yeah, fair enough. I haven't looked that much into it.
I think he did retire more than any other driver.
Yes,
so,
yeah.
That does say something, but yeah.
Yeah, I don't know.
I mean, it's not just like, we can talk about the drivers. It's not just the drivers.
No,
but
it's
anyway,
not. Yeah, I'll move on to that. But I feel like Ocon, particularly his racecraft. Again, we talk about the racecraft a bit with some of the drivers, but Ocon has been known to be kind of forceful and a bit not clumsy, but he'll just, like, if he sees a move, he will just send it. Kind of damned be the consequences, and sometimes that's had mixed results in the past. But I feel like particularly there was a few moves. There's one in particular I remember watching at Spa where he went like at the end of the straight at the hairpin. It was at Sonoda, and he went sort of around the outside into the sort of right left at the end of the Kemmel straight. And he stuck this incredible move in the wet, like in the slidey conditions around Sonoda, and just like absolutely centered around it. It was one of the best moves of the season. Like, you look at it, like, I don't know how the
he
fuck
can make some killer moves. But
I feel like you look at Ocon, Gasly, and maybe that's the disappointing thing with Ocon is, like, I feel like Ocon's ceiling is so high. Like, I feel like he could be like a very, very strong driver.
He was going to be the next Mercedes protege.
Yes, that's
he did
right,
very strong against Checo. He was very strong coming in part season in manner. He was going to be a big thing coming in here. He did fine against Alonso, but as we say, we should be, as I'm saying, if we're talking about his future career prospects, we should be talking to him, in a very high level, and yet we're talking about him in a good level.
Yeah.
But good is not going to get him anywhere in 1 to 2 years. That's
True.
the way to the door when he's 4 or 5 years in with the same team. And where's he going to go after that? Who's going to pick him up if this is his performance, right? Like, Alpine obviously had to pick someone up after everything played out how it did, right? And Gasly, I think, saw that as an opportunity, and he had proved enough in his Alpha Tauri to be able to have another team to pick him up. But let's say an Aston drops a Stroll, are they going to pick an Ocon over anyone else? No, that's not my first choice. That's maybe 5 or 6.
Yeah.
So
especially
if
when
Audi's looking,
well, especially
going to look at Ocon.
I was going to say, especially when you already have comparisons between Alonso and Ocon, like direct comparison at the same team. You could be like, well,
true,
that's not what
but
we're
you know what
looking
I'm saying,
for.
right?
Yeah.
That's what they're looking for.
Yes,
It's that sideways move to get lucky with something, right?
Yeah.
If a Haas were to drop someone, I don't think they're going for an Ocon. So
No, I don't think so.
that's the perspective you got to look at it at. It's still fine, but yeah, in the position that he's in.
Yeah.
Yes, but broader to that team, it's easy to forget that it's surprising they did as well as they did, because in the middle of the year, well, it kind of started earlier than that, but really that was the final song of everything crashing down on stage in a big pile of broken set.
Yes.
So yes, we had, because who was it that left?
So I've got all the names here. So
I was gonna say,
this year,
of course you've got it. You're ready.
This year they had 4 very prominent names in their like team leave. They had Laurent Rossi, which is their CEO. He left. Otmar, who is their team principal, left. Alan Permain, who had been there for a while as well, and then Pat Fry, who's obviously a very big figure name. I think he was only there for a couple of years or a few years as well. He was one of those that when they were doing their initial restructuring, he was their big pickup name that came from Mercedes, McLaren.
He might have been Mercedes, Williams,
like that,
somewhere, McLaren.
But he was like a big name. I think he went to Williams after he left Alpine. He's now at Williams, I believe.
That sounds right. We can check.
Either Williams or McLaren. Let me have a look. I'm going to look it up right now. Pat Fry is at Williams as the Chief Technical Officer. I'm glad I remembered that. God, I'm good.
Good job.
Yeah, so those are 4, like, it's not even 4 names that you don't know, like, it's people behind the scenes that you don't hear about. It's like 4 names, like, oh, I've heard those names before. They must be pretty big in the team. And they all left this year.
And you say left. Notice it's not voluntarily left for all of those. The fact that there was, some who didn't even want to leave. It's not even like, some of them went, this just isn't working out. I've got a better offer. I've got to leave. Some of those that expected to be turning up on a race weekend were then being asked by the media, what are you doing after this? And they're like,
no idea.
Didn't realize this was in the public and didn't realize it was so soon.
Yes. Yes. It's, we even talked about this when they were doing their big restructuring coming into, this is a couple of years ago now, they were doing
what is
that.
It? 3-year plan, 100 race plan. There's a 100 race plan or whatever.
Yeah, okay. Because it was...
That's what they keep calling it at the start of every year. Our new 100 race plan to get to the top.
Because I remember talking exactly about this when we were comparing, Aston had their 5-year plan. And then Alpine, they were, I think it was a year later, they were starting to make all their big restructuring, like a year later than every other team was doing all that.
5-year plan, yes.
Yeah, exactly. And we even commented then, it's like, it feels like a year too late or like 6 months too late. They should have been doing this earlier. And now
this feels like the afterflow of that, where they realize they've got it wrong and they're having to just let out their laundry in the public, trying to fix.
Yeah, exactly.
Some
and now
choices they made they know aren't working.
Kind of feels like they're back to square one again, where they don't really know what they're doing.
They're just stuck in limbo at a time when, as we say, you saw Aston and McLaren kind of fighting for that P4. Almost, at the start of the year, if you would have guessed, you would have gone, Aston, McLaren, Alpine fighting. If someone hadn't watched F1 that much, you would have gone, oh, it was a great fight between McLaren and Aston. They go, yeah, would Alpine up there? And you go, probably should have been.
Yep.
It's a failure that they weren't. I think the minimum was they should have been in that genuine fight for P4. I said, if they got everything right, they could have, but partly, 1, they didn't, and 2, they shouldn't have needed to. They should have just been performing at a better level, where they could have had some slip-ups and still been in contention for that P4 anyway.
Yes.
Yet they weren't. And they're, that far off being chased by other teams that are, almost in year 1 of their 5-year plan. If they get overtaken by them...
Yeah.
It's
not good, is it? Like, and like you think about it, Alpha Tauri close to the end of the year, they're now... They were like racing Alpine sometimes even faster than them in those last few races with those upgrades.
And where you look at their trajectory with their big plans for next year, what's to say that's not going to consistently go up there, right?
Yep. So it's it's not looking great for Alpine. They just seem to be that team that's gonna. Yeah. I feel like they're going to be the scapegoat.
Aston did well. They just had egg on their face.
Yep.
Because the only saving grace they had at that point was they were saying we've got a 5-year plan, but no one really knew how hard it was to make that jump. That jump was always really hard. McLaren kept getting close and then kept losing it. So we just went, it's really hard. Yeah. Alpine, if you've got to go for it, they've got to be brave.
And then Aston
beat them to it. Yeah. And then everyone went, well, look, you can do it. Yeah. And then Alpine were like, shit.
Yeah.
Why'd you have to ruin our good thing we had going here?
That's the thing. Aston were like, they were in, was this year 3 or 4 of their plan.
Something like that.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's
but,
still
like,
within that
the
window
first-
if you say that climb.
Exactly. The first 2
They
years...
still got a factory they haven't even finished yet. You know, their
Yeah.
big building, their everything, and yet this is what they've done so far.
The first, 2-3 years, however many years, maybe 2 years of their plan. And it's like, you're looking at it, you're like, oh yeah, what's that 5-year plan? You're getting real close. And they were still like back of the grid, of the grid, like nowhere. And you're just thinking,
the whole Vettel thing, which is supposed to be
and
part
like
of
you
it.
say, mix that with the McLaren getting close, then dropping back, blah blah blah, all that. And you look at Alpine, it's like, you know what? Granted, Alpine, all things considered, actually doing okay. And then you see Aston make that big jump, and you're like, oh, okay, they weren't bluffing.
Yes.
And then, you know, when they did it, and then obviously McLaren have their big upgrades, and now they're at the front, and Alpine are still nowhere, and it's like, yes, so it's...
And even when Aston fell a bit, they didn't fall behind Alpine really either.
Really, no.
Which meant they're still ending in a better position than Alpine, who kind of started earlier than them. And McLaren is, you know, obviously, I guess you could say they're in year 4 to 5 of any sort of plan they might have, you know, with their restructures 4 or 5 years ago, getting Norris and all that jazz.
Yes,
they're looking real hot, and yet Alpine, you just go, look, sure, they could come out and just come up with something, but it's not looking like it, especially with this year that they've had. As we say, their lineup is shaky as it is as well.
Yeah, very true. So
to see,
yeah,
one to look at next year. Very interesting.
Yeah, I think that one. I think next year's going to be, well, this year's going to be very, very telling for
next
for
F1
Alpine.
year.
Yes, F1 year. Yes.
Why didn't we do this yesterday?
Yeah,
All this bloody conjecture and.
Well.
Well.
All right, next team I've got. They're still only up to number 5. We're gonna have to rush through these. Well, this one probably shouldn't be too long. This is Alfa Romeo. So, I mean, they finished 9th in the standings with 16 points. Bottas with 10, Zhou with 6, P15 and 18 respectively. Qualifying head-to-head was 16-6 Bottas. It was relatively dominant from Bottas's side. I mean, this one can be really quick. It was a pretty unremarkable season. I know they finished 9th, but I would argue they were the weakest team on the grid overall.
Yeah.
I think they started really, really well. I remember Bottas, in particular, his qualifyings and even the race, mainly the qualifying, but he was consistently faster than Zhou. He was qualifying within the top 10s, like you'd see him up there quite a lot. And it looked like they were onto something. And I feel like same as last year, they just sort of faded to the back again. And
they couldn't bring it forward above that. They started with a decent thing, and then they just didn't really know.
Yep.
But you didn't even remember them bringing much. It's not like a Haas, which I guess we can partially tease towards, where they started pretty even strong, you'd argue, and particularly had something that worked in qualifying. And they had this, I'm trying not to talk about them too much, but still, I'm saying they're a team where they then brought big upgrades and they didn't work, and at least you could see things happening.
Yeah.
But Alfa, it's like, I couldn't even tell you a race they brought an upgrade. Every other team, I think I could. I don't remember when Alfa Romeo did anything.
Neither. No. I'm sure we pointed it out.
I remember Bottas starting strong, which he has started strong. And it's a shame because they almost were, I guess, what Williams has taken over now, where they used to be that giant killer, where, when Leclerc came in and you saw him get up there and, actually smash out a performance, and get a big points. Even when Kimi was there, he could occasionally do it. And I think their lineup is fine. I think a lot of people, and I'm glad that you picked it up too, thought that Bottas actually had a good year with the car that he had. He probably extracted the most he could. And again, this is a car that he came from Mercedes a few years back, and now he's kind of settled here, but he's still obviously motivated. He wants to try something. I still think Zhou Guanyu had a fine year. Obviously, he did well enough that he's not getting kicked out for obviously a team that actually has a young driver that's obviously done quite well. So the fact that he's not getting kicked out shows that he's done enough.
Yeah.
But maybe it's the whole culture of the team where they don't want to if they wanted to really scrap it and change it up, you'd think they would get rid of him for Porsche, obviously. So
I think a lot of it has to do with them wanting him to get to the Chinese Grand Prix at least once. And then if he does kind of similar results or whatever, then
it's
maybe
it's the thing. You feel like it is another 1 year thing, right? They don't need to make a change. Porsche is there, but he's not at that Piastri level, and it is almost like it doesn't hurt to hold him for a year, then put him in over one of them, and then see how the two go again. Obviously they've got big things. I think they were supposed to reveal their name. They might have done it already. I saw a tweet come out. Their name like leaked or came. I thought their name came out.
I think it
because
just
it looked
leaked.
stupid.
Yeah.
And then on Twitter they're like, "Oh, we're revealing our new name." And they're like making puns around it. Like they knew it had leaked, and you know they were trying to say like, "You think this is ridiculous now, but wait until you see our new name." And it's like, but what do you mean? That like it just confused me.
Yeah,
so
I don't understand. So.
Anyway, I'm trying to be distracted. I've been thinking about that before. I'm like, I haven't seen if they've actually revealed what the hell they're teasing here, because I really want to know.
That's the worst name I ever heard.
But I'm more saying they're in this holding pattern now. So it's almost like next year, is it just every weekend's going to be like a test weekend with these two drivers, and then they get like, I feel like they might scrap off. I'm trying not to look ahead, but it's just not much happened at the year, right?
No,
2024, are they just going to pull like a Haas where they're going to scrap it, they're going to use it as a test, try some zany things, and figure out what the fuck 2025 and beyond looks like? That feels like that's what this year is going to be. Do they want a junior in? Do they want a junior and experienced driver in?
Discussions with Audi to see what they want to do there. And,
exactly. What do they look like in this midterm into Audi? Off the back of a year which was, but the thing is, they could come out and just crush it. They're one of those teams where they could just come out and actually do. Yeah. They could pull it. They could pull an Aston for all we know. They could have been cooking, right?
Yeah,
just
not public.
Quiet.
Yeah, exactly.
I know it's similar to Alpine, except Alpine have been so public with their desires that it just goes nowhere. Alpha aren't really that public. You know, it is Sauber. This is Sauber we've always known. They get that, you know, P8, P9. Sometimes they're up there, but they at least still just check, you know, get their, you know, good sponsors and decent drivers, and, you know, have their day and keep on the grid as they always have, and that's just what they're going to keep doing. But it could be their year. You know, it wasn't this year, but it wasn't a bad year. It's hard to see them higher. You feel like, you know, Alpha Tauri maybe should have been P7. You feel like Haas shouldn't have been P10. But Alpha P9, you go, look, it would have been really hard to get a P8 from that Alpha Tauri with how good it was. If they got a P9, I think that's actually pretty good for them.
I
to
think
not be
so.
P10.
I think so.
That's the summary, I think.
I was surprised when looking at it that they end up P9, not P10, actually. So, because I feel like they were, by the end of the season, if you look at it as a whole, again, obviously ups and downs, blah, blah.
Yeah.
If you look at it, I feel like they were the weakest team. And it's only marginal, and it varies week to week, but they did seem to, they just had nothing by the end of the season, I felt like. But yeah, not much to talk about.
Bottas in a P15 in a 22 card grid. Car grid.
Yes, yeah. Yeah,
that's not bad.
Yeah, it's not too bad. Yeah, and like I said, he had a couple of really good performances where he's like well inside the points. I think did he get a P7? He might have got a P7 or a P8.
I feel like early on he had
Miami?
7 or 8.
Miami had a really good race.
Yeah, it was in that first.
Again, first few races, which is where they were strong.
Yeah.
So, which, you know, if they do get it right, it shows that hey, they can still do something. You know, Bottas he can still drive well enough to get good points if they can give him a car that actually is good enough to be in the points. He can still do it. So, but yeah, otherwise a pretty unremarkable season. Again, we'll have to see what happens for 2024.